Did those slides come through?
Not yet, but it might take it a little bit of time since it's such a large file.
Okay, well, if not, email me and I can send you a link to a box that has them.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Hi, welcome to today's OBSSR Directors webinar entitled Packaging Color Research by Tobacco Companies, the PAC as a Product Characteristic. I'm Christine Hunter, the Deputy Director of the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research at the National Institutes of Health. Before I introduce today's speaker, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available in about a month, and it'll be on the OBSSR website. Today's presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. All phone lines are going to be muted during the webinar, and questions and comments will not be taken over the phone, but will be taken using the WebEx question and answer feature. To ask a question or send a comment, click on Q&A, select all panelists, type in your question, and then select send. Feel free to send a question at any time during the webinar. Following the presentation, Dr. Bill Elwood, who coordinates the webinar series, will facilitate the question and answer session and ask your questions to the presenter. So now let's get started with the main event. I'm really pleased to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Stanton Glantz. Dr. Glantz is the University of California, San Francisco Truth Initiative Distinguished Professor of Tobacco Control. He conducts research on a wide range of topics, including the health effects of secondhand smoke, particularly on the cardiovascular system, and the efficacy of different tobacco control policies. To reflect the changing tobacco landscape, his work now includes e-cigarettes and marijuana. Dr. Glantz is the principal investigator for the $20 million 5-year Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science, funded by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health. The overarching theme of this center is the development of improved models to inform tobacco product regulatory strategies that integrate, 1, the impacts of tobacco use on health costs, 2, risk perceptions, perceived acceptability, consumer responses to pro-tobacco marketing and anti-tobacco messages and other social determinants of tobacco use, and 3rd, evaluates the rapid change in risk due to tobacco use and secondhand smoke exposure, particularly related to cardiovascular and pulmonary dysfunction. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Glantz to the OBSSR Directors webinar for his presentation, again titled Packaging Color Research by Tobacco Companies, the PAC as a Product Characteristic. And now I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Glantz. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. This is work I did in collaboration with Lauren Lemper, who I was hoping would be here, but has had some family issues to deal with, so probably won't be. The context for this research is that the FDA has the authority to regulate tobacco products, and when the tobacco companies change a product in a substantial way, they need to get the FDA's approval. And the discussion and policy considerations of those changes so far has been focused on the physical product itself. And so we wanted to look at whether or not things like the product packaging should be considered as also key elements that are in many ways no different from the tobacco in the product itself. I have nothing to disclose. I don't do any paid consulting work for anybody. The one thing I would add, and I just realized listening to Erica's introduction, I have to update my biography, because I'm very pleased to say that our $20 million T course just got renewed for another 5 years. And we're going to be focusing mostly on the new tobacco products like e-cigarettes and heat-not-burn products. So when you think about cigarette packs, the way that most people think about them, and this is all accurate but incomplete, is that they serve to attract attention to the product, to communicate brand imagery about the product, to target specific groups, for example, having packs directed at women or at one minority group or another. They also use them, as I'll show you, to communicate health information, and a more precise statement would be to communicate inaccurate health information, which we think the government needs to clamp down on. And as an illustration of the way that the tobacco companies use the pack to communicate inaccurate health information, these are some old cigarette packs from Marlboro, Marlboro Lights, and Marlboro Ultralights. And these packs are illegal today because a great deal of research leading to a decision by a U.S. federal court that found the tobacco companies guilty of a violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, as well as Congress in the law that gave the FDA authority over tobacco, found that labeling packages as cigarette packages as light or ultralight is fundamentally misleading to the public, because these are read as health messages, that Marlboro Lights are safer than Marlboro Reds, and Marlboro Ultralights are safer than Marlboro Lights. And the tobacco companies knew for a long, long time that in fact the risks associated with these different cigarettes are all about the same, and that by advertising them as light or ultralight, they're making an implied health claim, which is misleading to the public and fraudulent. And so they're not allowed to do that anymore. So now this is what they do. Instead of using the word light and ultralight, they just simply color code the packages. The packages are the same. They just got rid of the words. And before the law took effect that prohibited the use of these product descriptors, the tobacco companies spent about a year educating their customers about the color change, and that the color coding it means the same thing as the words, but the words are gone. And we and a lot of other people have felt that this is something that the FDA really needed to clamp down on and prohibit this kind of color coding, which is actually illegal in some countries. Now, we know that the tobacco companies did this quite thoughtfully, because this is an example of consumer information and information for sellers that were distributed, in this case by Philip Morris, before the change took place. And they were very explicit about it. The old Marlboro Lights are now Marlboro Gold. And so the color is being used to encode a health claim, namely, this is a safer cigarette than Marlboro Reds. And I'll come back to that in some detail later. So this game of using color coding as a way of making health claims has been pretty well documented and understood for quite a long time. And what we wanted to do was look at other more sophisticated ways that the companies are using the pack, where you can argue that the pack itself is an ingredient in the tobacco product, just like the tobacco is. And as I'll show you, the tobacco companies have done research showing that they can change the perceived flavor of a cigarette by simply changing the color of the pack without touching the physical cigarette at all. And this work is summarized in two papers that Lauren and I published in the last couple of years. The first one in tobacco control is packaging color, research by tobacco companies. The pack is a product characteristic. And the second paper, published in Nicotine and Tobacco Research, was implications of tobacco industry research on packaging colors for designing health warning labels. So first, I'm going to talk about the first paper. Now, the tobacco companies have a very, very sophisticated understanding of how people perceive their products and something called sensation transference. This was an idea developed by a psychologist named Louis Cheskin, an academic, back in the 1950s. And what he demonstrated was that a consumer unconsciously assesses a product based on its packaging. And for example, yellow margarine tastes more like butter than margarine that's another color. Margarine is not normally yellow, but they put coloring in it to make it taste like butter. And that changes in the pack color of a cigarette pack or other consumer product affects the perception of the product taste. And another very, very important point that came out of Cheskin's work was that consumers don't distinguish between the package and the product. They're just very tightly intertwined. And we think it's important that the FDA and other regulatory bodies around the world really pay attention to this, because it's a reality that the tobacco companies have used for a long time in order to sell their products and manipulate their consumers. And to date, the real focus has been on the physical product itself. So this is a classic example of what we're talking about. So Philip Morris Marlboro was originally a product, a cigarette for women. And in the 50s, I think it was the 50s, Philip Morris decided they wanted to turn it into a cigarette for men. And they spent 7 years researching on how to do it. They hired Cheskin and his Color Research Institute to help them do it. And they did experiments where they put the same cigarettes in different packages. And what they found was the light-colored pack conveyed that the cigarettes were mild and intended for women. And so the perception when using the cigarettes were that these were mild cigarettes of the kind that women would like. If they went to the current red pack, then the cigarettes were perceived as stronger, full flavor, and for men. And it's important to realize that the cigarettes were exactly the same physical entities in these experiments. And so what Philip Morris did is they went from this pack, which was the earlier Marlboro pack that had been perceived as a women's cigarette, to the classic Marlboro pack where it's a strong package for men. And the packaging change was the single most important element of changing the perception of the product. Now, they also supported this with advertising. And here we see a classic Marlboro ad back from the 30s, the added charm of smoking Marlboro cigarettes, you know, for a woman. And then they replaced that with the famous Marlboro Cowboy developed by Leo Burnett advertising, and switched the image and the perception of the product from a mild women's cigarette to a strong, full-flavored cigarette for men. Now, we know a lot about how the tobacco companies do this and why they do it, because here at UCSF we have a collection called the Truth Tobacco Industry Documents Library, and it's named that because the Truth Initiative put up the initial money to create this collection. And it has about 90 million pages of previously secret internal tobacco industry documents in it. The original box of documents was delivered anonymously to me, about 4,000 or 5,000 pages, back in 1994, and we slowly collected some other collections, and then as a result of all the state litigation against the tobacco industry and then the federal racketeering suit, those documents have been made available, and we've added them to the collection. And in fact, under the order issued by Judge Gladys Kessler in the federal lawsuit, the companies have been ordered to continue producing documents to the public, which means us, until 2021. So this collection is continuing to grow. Now, a lot of people go into the tobacco industry documents looking for evidence of bad behavior by the cigarette companies, things like marketing to kids or trying to buy off politicians or corrupt the process in various ways. And there's certainly lots and lots of that kind of stuff in there. But the collection also includes a huge amount of research conducted by the tobacco companies, both on their products and on the marketing of their products, including packaging. And their research is very sophisticated, and they have a lot of money to do it, and there's a huge amount to learn from them. And so the stuff I'm going to be presenting today is that kind of tobacco industry documents research, where we're going in and looking at the industry's unpublished research that they use in their own management of the companies. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude, I typed color packaging into the search engine and got back 77,789 documents. So there's a lot of stuff in there related to this. And in fact, one of the things that popped up is this document, which is the educational materials that they produced to give to retailers to educate them about the fact that Congress passed a law prohibiting the use of terms light and ultralight and mild, effective in June 2010. And this document, which goes on for many pages, is essentially a code sheet to say if the customer comes in asking for Marlboro, full-flavored Marlboro, give them Marlboro Red. If they want marijuana, Marlboro Ultralights, give them Marlboro Silver. And it's a cheat sheet for consumer, or for the retailers, on how to educate consumers on how to interpret the new color coding of the packs. And it goes on at great length with many examples. And interestingly, it says, don't give this to the consumer. And, you know, I've wondered ever since we saw this why the FDA has not issued an order prohibiting the companies from continuing to do this color coding, because it's a violation of the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, and it's also a violation of the RICO settlement, which prohibits the companies from these kind of misleading communications. And I think one of the reasons that the companies are getting away with it is that lawyers are used to thinking about words, not colors. They're lawyers, not artists. But the tobacco companies understand this very, very well. Another thing that's very, very important that we found in the documents, and this is an R.J. Reynolds document, and I think it was from the 80s. I forgot to put the date on here. But when they're talking about the sensation transference, that is the application of Cheskin's research, they say the package and the product are one and the same to the consumer due to sensation transference. The package generates expectations, and people generally get what they expect. In repeated tests, consumers will declare one product superior to another, although only the packages or labels are different. So again, just simply changing the packaging changes the perception of the product in a way that you could also obtain by changing the physical product. And we think that regulators need to realize and treat these things as equivalent. Another statement in here, which is very important from a legal and policy point of view, is the statement near the bottom. A package can create a new product. And under the Family Smoking and Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, if tobacco companies create new products, they need specific FDA approval for doing that. And to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing in the way the FDA assesses changes to products that explicitly takes this understanding into account, and they need to. Another thing, and this is all from a briefing, an internal briefing, it was from RJR, but there was no date on it, is that color is a hidden persuader, since its appeal is subconscious. People transfer its effects into the contents of the packages. And in cigarette packaging, colors have become standardized cues, such as red for full flavor, green for menthol, white or silver for low, ultra-low tar cigarettes. So this is something the industry's understood for a very, very long time, and it's something that regulators, at least in the United States, have not caught up with yet. Again, there are a few countries like Uruguay which prohibit this kind of manipulation, but here in the U.S., there's no restrictions on it whatsoever. Now, I'm not expecting you to read this slide, but this is a table that lists all the different studies we found where various tobacco companies were evaluating the relationship between package color and perception of the product. And you can see there's a ton of them being done by all the companies over a long period of time. So there's a very large, well-developed body of evidence in research conducted internally by the tobacco companies on the connection between package color and perception of the product. And again, if you look at all this together, there are some patterns that emerge over and over and over again. Full flavor and rich taste is for packs that are red, brown, and blue. Red and blue are perceived as more satisfying. Red, black, and brown are perceived as stronger. Blue is perceived as smoother. Silver has a good aftertaste, and white and light are low strength, which means healthier in terms of how consumers perceive it. And mild, which is somewhere between the low strength and full flavor, is blue, silver, and gray. And these are widely understood in the industry. And then menthol is cool and fresh, which is done with green and silver. And in fact, up in Canada, when Ontario banned the advertisement of menthol cigarettes, they simply, again, spent some time educating their consumers, and just that green means menthol. So these are just some examples of, full flavor cigarettes from two companies here. Philip Morris and Winston, I think, is made by Reynolds, or now it is. Again, Pall Mall and Lucky Strikes are red. Different brands of menthol are green. Light and mild are silver and white. And these are very, very important understandings of how the packaging color is manipulated to communicate information and claims to the consumer, which are illegal in the United States. Now, to give you a specific example of some of the company research that we found, where they were really looking at the impact of pack color on the package to increase, I think I already, so I already said a couple of these things, I apologize. But again, the experience of smoking the cigarettes and the research techniques that they use to do this are traditional market surveys, where they go out and just ask people what brands they use and how they perceive the brands. But they also do experimental research, what they call association tests, where they show people or different packages, or give people cigarettes in different packages where they keep the cigarettes the same, and then ask people how they perceive tasting them. They also do what's called ocular tracking, eye tracking, where they have people looking at packages or advertisements for packages, and using a laser they can track how their eyes move and what they're looking at on the packages. And something called tachyoscopic testing, which is a variant of ocular measurements. And then British American Tobacco came up with something they called a repertory grid, which is a way to have consumers scale the perception of the product on a series of variables. And this is the BAT repertory grid from back in 1978. And this is just one little piece of a much larger set of scales, but when they're asking people, do you perceive the smoke as hot or cool, rough or smooth, a hard or easy draw, satisfying, whether it's musty and stale up to fresh, how they perceive the side stream smoke, and so on. And again, they would do experiments where they kept the cigarettes the same and changed the packaging and then measured how people's perception of smoking the cigarettes changed based on changes in the packaging. And again, as I said earlier, red and blue packs are better tasting and more satisfying. So to give you an example of how they did this specifically, there's extensive documentation in the documents about back in 1979 how R.J. Reynolds redesigned the Camel package. And this was a period of increasing public concern about the dangers of smoking, and they were concerned that people felt that Camels were too strong, which meant too dangerous. And so they wanted to reduce the perception that Camel filtered cigarettes were stronger, that is, more dangerous than other cigarettes, but they wanted to maintain the other desired product perceptions, namely that they tasted good and were satisfying, that they delivered an adequate amount of tar and nicotine, and that they were smooth, that they were easy to inhale. Now, you would think that these perceptions are all taken together would mean a stronger cigarette, but they wanted to maintain these very detailed perceptions without at the same time creating the perception that they were so strong as to be bad. And then at the same time, they wanted to maintain the brand attributes that were used in their marketing of a masculine, young adult, rugged cigarette. So they did a whole bunch of experiments, and this is what they came up with in terms of how the package should be redesigned to change the perceptions of the product without changing the product. So they reduced the red band to increase the amount of white surface area on the pack, which reduced strength perceptions. They lightened the brown tones to reduce strength perceptions. They changed the closer seal on the pack from brown to white with a red stripe to match the banding, which reduced strength perceptions. Well, I just saw Lauren Lempert is on. That's good. So she can help answer the questions. Reduce strength perceptions, but look better and improve recognition, and then change the panel, and so on. And so if you look at the changes they made from the old pack to the new pack, here you see these changes that were implemented as a way to move the way people perceive using Camel cigarettes. And the packages have continued to evolve from the older ones and the ones that we were just talking about to bring in, more blues and silvers to make it look less dangerous. And then they came up with packs that were tied in to specific promotional campaigns. And if you look at the ones at the bottom, the green ones are menthol, right? They don't have to tell you that, they're there. And so these are all things that we think should be subject to FDA regulation, and any change to the pack, any change to the colors, to the fonts, any of those things, we think should be treated no differently than if the company wants to change the mixture of tobacco in the product. So moving on to the second paper we wrote is what can we learn from the tobacco companies about warning labels and the best way to use warning labels to educate consumers about the dangers of tobacco. And a lot of this grows out of their research on how to make the pack stand out, particularly when it's in a product display. And they find that black and red are highly prominent, that red and yellow seize attention, that contrast is important, reds or blacks on white, and that yellow is a danger warning. And in fact, another thing which we didn't put in the slide is that black text on a white background, which is the most common way that warning labels are used, actually looks like it's conveying health information, positive health information. So the warning label using black text on white type is probably not a good idea. This is an example of, actually this slide is a bit out of order. This is where BAT was doing tachyoscopic testing to compare a couple of packages where they have very similar information on them, but with different layouts, and they measured how long it took people to recognize the pack and how their eyes moved around the pack. In terms of the warning label question, the main thing that we would take away from this is learn from bees. Black and yellow are a warning message, and also this is something that's very, very well understood if you simply look at highway warning signs. Warning signs are black text on a yellow background. So, you know, we think that the warning labels that are being developed and required by governments should be yellow with a background with a black text. And we took one of the old FDA warnings, this one for lung disease, and simply changed the background from white to yellow. And I think if you look at this, you would see that this is much more eye-grabbing than the traditional black on white. So what can you conclude from all of this? One is that companies use pack colors to manipulate consumer perceptions of taste, strength, and the harm of cigarettes. And this is very important because under the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, in order to make a reduced harm claim, what under the law is called a modified risk tobacco product claim, they need explicit permission from the FDA to do it. And there's a very, very rigorous process that the industry is required to go through that, among other things, shows that there's scientific evidence to support the claim of reduced harm, and that the consumers will actually understand the reduced harm claims. And also that allowing the companies to make such claims is good for the public health, which is the broad standard written into the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. And it's important that the federal government start making use of the understanding that the tobacco companies have at this point, and make sure that they stop using package design changes, or in fact the current package design changes, to mislead consumers and violate the law. Another very important point that comes out of this is that pack color changes not only communicate product information, like is this a masculine or a feminine product, or is it strong and weak, but it effectively creates new products. And this is a very, very important understanding, because the standards in the law for introducing new products is different than the standard for tinkering with existing products. And finally, industry research on visual prominence suggests that using black on yellow seizes and keeps attention longer than other combinations, and it explicitly signals danger. For example, if you look at the cigarette packs that are out there, I don't think you find too many that are the same color as my screaming yellow bicycle windbreak. So what are the policy recommendations? First, we think companies should be prevented from using packaging to deceive customers. The FDA has the legal authority to do this. They need to do it. Second, the company should be required to report color changes in packaging documents, along with the mandatory reporting of physical product changes, and those should be evaluated by the FDA as to whether they're permitted or not, just the same as they would have to evaluate a physical product change. And the FDA originally did take the position that packaging labels are part of the product in pre-market reviews, but they've kind of backed off from that. And the FDA's initial position was right, and they need to reassert it. And finally, the make health warning labels, black text on yellow background. So that's what we learned from the tobacco companies. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Stan.
Yeah, also, as I said, I noticed that Lauren is here, so you should let her answer questions too, so, as well as me. So I'm happy to take questions.
Hi, Stan. This is Erica. So Lauren is on, but she has a bad connection, so we're going to leave her muted, but she may be able to help answer questions over chat.
Okay.
Stan, just a couple of questions. Regarding color, is that hidden persuader on packaging? We know that your work obviously is only with tobacco products, but is there research that shows that the connotations, the hidden persuasions associated between color and packaging applies across products?
Yes, if you look at Cheskin's early work, he wasn't just looking at tobacco products, he was looking at a wide variety of products. And in fact, we have a paper in review right now which shows about sugar-sweetened beverages, because it turns out that for about 15 years, the tobacco, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds were in the sugar-sweetened beverage business. They bought 7-Up, Kool-Aid, Hawaiian Punch, and several other products, and they took and transferred the technology they had developed for cigarettes into the marketing of these other products, particularly to increase their appeal to kids. So yeah, all of this transfers right over. These are not unique to tobacco.
Okay. Do you find, have you found similar coloring trends with vaping products or marijuana?
You know, that's a good question. We haven't looked at that yet, but you know, and the marijuana market isn't as well developed yet as the cigarette market. And in fact, one of my great fears about the legal, I mean, I actually support legalization of marijuana because I think the war on drugs has been a disaster. But one of the big concerns is that as the market becomes corporatized and we bring the kind of modern product engineering and packaging to bear in the marijuana business as we've had in tobacco and other of the junk food and other things, that we're going to see big increases in the health costs of using these products as the marketing becomes more sophisticated. That's just beginning to happen now, and we haven't yet seen the entry of these big companies into the marijuana market yet. But I can tell you the tobacco companies were thinking about getting into the marijuana business back in the 60s and the 70s. They were getting ready to do it, and then the war on drugs came along. and they decided not to. The tobacco industry is bought into the marijuana business in Canada where it's legal. And I haven't read the news story, but just today there was a report that Coca-Cola is interested in getting into the marijuana business as a way to make up for the fact that fewer people are drinking sugar-sweetened beverages. So, you know, I think that good, you know, public health-oriented regulation of marijuana would begin with what would be the gold standard for tobacco, which is plain packaging. And I haven't really talked about that in this presentation because I was trying to keep it narrowly focused, but many countries now deal with the fact that the pack is inherently misleading by requiring standardized packaging, where the color of the package is specified by the government, and the different product sub-elements are in there in a standardized font and a standardized size. Australia was the first country to implement plain packaging. It's actually spreading around the world. And, you know, we've been urging here in California, we've been urging the health authorities and the state marijuana bureau to simply require plain packaging of marijuana products so that we avoid all of these problems that you run into with that we've had with cigarettes, particularly in not using kid-flavored colors or kid-friendly colors, making them look like candy and toys.
So you would recommend the same kind of packaging regulations for tobacco, all tobacco products, e-cigarettes, and marijuana?
Yes. I mean,
okay.
ideally we should have plain packaging for everything. And, you know, that way the product is made available to people, but the package cannot be used in order to deceive people and to make them think that different products are different when in fact they're the same.
Lauren points out that mild and smooth flavors in other products are also light colored.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the general principles that I outlined here about the effect of different colors on perception, those are broad principles that a lot of Cheskin's work and the subsequent work found applied across products.
What's known about how these color manipulations alter effective processing? Specifically, are these all changes in reflective processing, or do you see changes in automatic processing as well?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe, I know Lauren can't talk, but she can text. Lauren, when you were looking in the documents, did you see those kind of distinctions? Okay, she just said Cheskin's work says it's subconscious. Okay.
You mentioned the Family Tobacco Control Act and enforcing the packaging regulations. Is that expressly in the Act, or is what you're recommending subject to interpretation?
Well, the law gives the FDA broad authority over the products and their marketing, which would include packaging. It's a question of whether the FDA wants to use that. They have the legal authority to do any of these things if they want it. Now, no doubt the tobacco companies would then sue them, but, you know, the FDA should just do the right thing. As I said earlier, the law already prohibits the use of light and mild, as does the judge's ruling in the RICO case. And I continue to be puzzled as to why, you know, given this large volume of research that we have in the industry documents. So you don't even have to go out and prove it. I mean, it's the industry, you know, they've already shown it and have acted on it. And I don't understand why the Department of Justice isn't going into court and bringing an action for contempt of court and violating the racketeering order or the FDA issuing an order prohibiting this kind of color coding, because the law doesn't outlaw the use of the words light and mild. It says that you're not supposed to communicate those ideas.
Okay.
Actual evidence of health benefits, which doesn't exist.
Got you. And Lauren points out that Greg Connolly wrote a paper about how PACs are evading the laws about claims for light and mild.
Yeah, I wonder, just to expand on that, Greg Connolly is a professor in Boston. What they did, you know, sometime after the tobacco companies had gone over to the color coding, is they did a big national survey of smokers and asked them, you know, how, you know, which pack is the full flavor, which packet is the ultra light, and with a very, very high level of precision, smokers were able to pick the appropriately color-coded packs.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to perhaps hypothesize a bit in a pedestrian way, and I wonder what thoughts you have about the color coding and advertising for nicotine replacement products, as there also is a big, you know, there is a big market for that. Do you see do you see similar trends in Nicorette and other nicotine replacement products that are more controlled and have, are those portrayed in a similar way to color coding research?
Well, you know, I've never looked at that, and that's a good question. The one thing so I can't answer that. The thing I can say, or another, I mean, that's something worth looking at, actually. But another thing that we haven't looked at is that R.J. Reynolds actually has a nicotine product called Zonic, which is sold over the counter as an alternative to smoking. But unlike nicotine replacement therapy, which, I mean, it's licensed by the FDA as a nicotine replacement therapy, but unlike the marketing of nicotine replacement therapy by pharmaceutical companies, which says you should use this product with counseling, Zonic is promoted as just a thing you can use when you can't smoke. And we ought to look at the Zonic packaging with all this in mind.
Okay. Are the effects of color acute, or do they involve a conditioning process so the effects become stronger with increased exposure?
Boy, I don't, these things have been around so long, I think they're pretty well established. But again, Lauren, did you see anything on that question?
Research.
Oh, go ahead, you can read it. It just disappeared.
Did you see it disappeared?
Send it again, Lauren.
Lauren says that research shows that some color impacts are immediate. Your recommendations about health messages being in black font on yellow backgrounds, is that something you might generalize to more health messages other than the dangers of tobacco, or do you limit that to tobacco products only?
No, I think again, you know, if you're driving down the road, the warning signs are black on yellow. And people are conditioned that black on yellow means danger. And so I think that black on yellow should be used on all kinds of warning labels.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Christine Hunter.
Lauren keeps putting messages up and they disappear. Is there a phone number she can call in where she could then talk?
She's not able to call in. So her message says also the
Tachyoscopic.
Thank you. So I'm reading from a distance. The tachyoscopic test measured by microseconds in the amount of time it takes for people to react to color. So that was what she wrote. The question I had was, you know, if black text on yellow background has kind of an automatic warning, is there a flip? Are there text or background colors that you think connotate health promoting that could be used to send, you know, healthy messages about products?
Black on white is healthy.
Oh yeah, I think, okay, you did say that. Sorry about that, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.
White is healthy. That's why they make the ultralight packages white or silver.
All right, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Elwood, for moderating the question and answer, and thank you, Dr. Glantz and Lauren, for participating by chat. We really appreciate that. It was a very engaging presentation on packaging color and how that influences use and perception. And I want to thank all of you who joined online today. If you have colleagues who wanted to see this presentation or might want to see this presentation but weren't able to join, please remind them that the recording of today's webinar will be available in about 1 month on the OBSSR website. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank everyone for attending, and again, thank you, Dr. Glantz, for a wonderful and thought-provoking presentation.
Well, thank you for having me, and also Lauren to the extent she was here.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.